Welcome to the Healthcare Voice of the New Right Network. This is Health on Health with Mario Nacinovich. Envisioned by the people, voiced by the people, powered by the people. It is everyday people with extraordinary values that make up New Right Network. Welcome to the Healthcare Voice of New Right Network. This is Stealth on Health. I'm Mario Nacinovich, and joining me for Ep7 today is the Chief Medical Officer of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Dr. Gwen Nichols. Dr. Nichols is a physician, scientific researcher. She's got an incredible combination of clinical, academic, and pharmaceutical experience. She advances the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's goals to find cancer cures and ensure access to treatments for all patients with hematologic malignancies. Those are blood cancers. I had the opportunity to first meet Dr. Nichols years ago. We were much younger at the time. And when she was the oncology site head of the Roche Translational Clinical Research Center, where she worked to develop new cancer therapies, translating them from the laboratory to clinical trials. And prior to joining Roche in 2007, Dr. Nichols actually worked at Columbia University, leading their hematologic malignancies program. She's trained in internal medicine at the University of Chicago. She completed her postdoctoral research and hematology oncology fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, where she was an attending physician. She's received her medical degree with honors from the State University of New York at Buffalo. She's served on numerous academic committees, several board appointments as well. She's been on the medical advisory board of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society for several years. She's published more than 40 publications, mostly focused in oncology. So welcome to the 7th episode of Stealth on Health. Dr. Nichols, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mario. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Dr. Nichols, I have to ask, after a long career in academia and pharma, what inspired you to join the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society?
Well, it's easy. It seemed like actually a dream job to me. I love taking care of patients. I love doing research. Um, the opportunity to help one person at a time was great. And when I worked in the pharma world, I had the opportunity to help, potentially hundreds of patients with a given disease by getting a drug going forward. But at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, I have the chance to really impact a broad swath of patients and really the business of cancer medicine. And that, for me, is incredibly exciting and exhilarating. And so I leapt at the opportunity when it arose.
So, what is the mission of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society for those that aren't aware?
Well, the LLS, and I'll use that because it's quite a mouthful, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, but LLS was founded about 70 years ago by a family who lost their 16-year-old son to leukemia. And their mission then was to do research, to support research, and to support patients who need help. And we have remained steadfast to that over the 70 years. Our mission focuses around research, cancer research, supporting it, finding new treatments and cures, educating both patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals, and providing financial, emotional support as well, not just educating, but supporting in many ways, and then advocacy, because all the cures in the world are meaningless if patients can't actually have access to them, if they can't afford them, if they can't get them because they aren't getting through the process of drug development. So we are, sort of an overall patient-focused organization.
And appropriately so, because as we know, years ago, very sadly, childhood leukemia was almost certainly a death sentence. And certainly today, I recently read that we've got survival rates of greater than 91% for children diagnosed with some of the most common forms of leukemia. What are some of the more prevalent blood cancers, and what are some of the more rare cancers?
Well, blood cancers in and of themselves, if you lump all of them together, there are hundreds of different types of blood cancer. And the more science that we support, the more we divide them up, the more we understand that there are many, many different subforms. Um, but the prevalent cancers are acute leukemias, chronic leukemias like chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and non-Hodgkin's and Hodgkin's lymphomas,
Mhm.
and also multiple myeloma, which is not in our name because we wouldn't be able to say it in a reasonable time frame, but
Sure.
it is one of the common blood cancers that we certainly provide a lot of research and support for. But I want to come back to what you said about childhood leukemia, because I think there's a really important point there.
Please.
Obviously, we're very proud that the disease that that young man whose parents started LLS died of, he would have a 90+% chance of being alive if he was diagnosed today. That's thanks to, you know, a lot of research and a lot of work by pediatric oncologists. But even so, there are many other types. You know, I don't want us to rest on our laurels and say, well, childhood leukemia, we've taken care of it.
Yeah, right. It's
Yeah.
check that.
It's still a deadly disease for many children. And the children who are cured, many, and the estimates are up to 80% of kids who are cured still have chronic health problems afterwards
Most
as
certainly.
adults. So we need better treatments. We've got the science down now. We need to change the treatment paradigm for kids
Understood.
and adults and adults.
Absolutely. So, for a newly diagnosed patient, child or adult, that is diagnosed with one of these blood cancers, what type of support does the patient need?
So oftentimes and you know, as a practitioner, I know this very well. The patient, you know, the docs give a lot of information to a patient, and depending on the acuity of the disease, it may be really intense information in the
Uh,
very first visit. And so patients oftentimes hear about a third of what is said because they're so in shock by finding out the cancer diagnosis. They need time and information. Patients need to process the information, to hear it again. Some patients need to hear it, some patients need to read, but they need additional information, and that's not because the docs and nurses haven't done a good job. It's just because
the processing part,
the
yeah.
processing takes a while. You're so in shock that you have many patients have no idea that they have an illness like this, and it comes out of the blue.
Yeah, I remember hearing over the course of my career just the impact and how literally it stops you in your tracks when you hear those words, you have cancer. And I could just only imagine how people begin to just start thinking about so many different things. And like you said, the healthcare
My
practitioner
job,
in
my
front of them,
kids,
yeah,
yeah,
you start thinking about all these different complex issues that surround their lives. They're not listening to the great information that you're providing. Can you elaborate a little bit more and describe to us some of the specific needs of patients in some of those specific groupings of blood cancers, and perhaps how the needs differ from one type of leukemia or lymphoma? Obviously, a great deal of difference in how you're talking to somebody with an acute versus chronic leukemia. Just give us a broad brushstroke on what different types of information those different types of patients may need.
sure. So many patients with acute leukemia need to be hospitalized or need to make a treatment decision fairly rapidly. And by that, I mean often 24 or 48 hours after the diagnosis is made.
Wow.
That really doesn't allow a lot of time for processing, for planning. It barely leaves enough time for patients to pack a toothbrush and get to the
Wow.
hospital, you know. And so in those instances, I think the patients just need to listen to the doc, get as much information as they can, and make sure they have a support system, that they have someone else, a friend, a spouse, a brother or sister, a neighbor, somebody who can be their second set of ears. And so I really encourage people to not try and go through this alone, because it's just so quick and so many important, really life or death and life altering decisions that have to be made very rapidly. um, Decisions about starting chemotherapy or not, decisions about fertility for younger patients, decisions about typing siblings for bone marrow transplantation. So many questions very rapidly.
Wow.
For
And
more, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
and I think that's a great consideration and certainly a great segue. And certainly being mindful and respectful of the individual patient's autonomy, because ultimately they're there to be able to make decisions for themselves. For a caregiver or a family member or a brother, sister, friend, like you described, what's that engagement like? So, what do you say to a loved one whose family member was just diagnosed? You've stated that these decisions need to be made rapidly. What type of support do they provide? Do they need from the healthcare practitioners, from the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, to help the patient make better decisions and be better informed, specifically because they're not hearing a lot of what you're saying?
Absolutely. Information, information, information. Uh, I think you remember the old commercial, a well-informed consumer is a,
It's our
is
best
our best
customer. Yeah,
customer.
yeah.
And that's
Cy
exactly
Sims.
right.
Yeah.
And that is, couldn't be truer
Wow.
for cancer. And this is for blood cancer, but it's across the board in cancer. The more good quality information you can get, the better. And I say good quality because there is so much crap, excuse the expression, out there
Sure.
on the internet and available, that you need trusted sources of information. So information from your healthcare provider or your nurse or your practitioner, and health information from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And I like to think of us as a physician extender, that we provide some of the information a caregiver needs to get, and they don't want to bother the doc saying, now I need to understand blah 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 blah.
Right.
So come to us. We have a free service called the Information Resource Center. And this is manned by professionals who are social workers or nurse educators. They can provide information, whether you like it as a booklet, a video, however you process your information, one-on-one support. We can find another patient or caregiver or family member who's been through what you're going through and
Fantastic.
tell you some really practical info. We can find resources locally, because we have chapters around the United States. So we can say, oh, you're in Minnesota, here's some local resources. Um, Questions to ask the doctor. Get a notebook, and we can help you with what are the most important questions given the disease diagnosis that you need to ask the doctor. Sometimes it's, do we need a second opinion? Is there any,
Is there
is there
time
any
for a
doubt?
second opinion?
Yeah, is there
Yeah.
time? Is there doubt about the diagnosis or the pathology? Um, are there other options? Is there a clinical trial I should
Mhm.
be on? And when the time is short, you need that quick information and you need to know what to ask. And I just think peace of mind is such a precious, precious thing
Now more than ever.
that, LLS wants to provide that, and it's free. It's there and it's free, and we've got people who are expert, kind, and ready to help.
As you would expect, I did my homework in preparation for our time together today, and I found something that you had said in an interview several years ago, and I want to read it for our viewers because I think it is so beautiful. You said, when someone experiences the fear and uncertainty of cancer diagnoses, we are here to provide hope, compassion, education, and support. Tell us how you and your colleagues bring this statement to life every day for patients, their caregivers, families, and the motivation that you have to continue doing this every day.
Well, it as I said before, it's devastating to find out of the blue that you or someone you love has a blood cancer diagnosis. And unless you happen to be a healthcare professional, you may not know very much about these diagnoses. You know, there are many more people with breast cancer or lung cancer
Right.
than there are with the multiple, you know, blood cancers are about 40% of all cancers, but there's so many
So many
different
of them. Yeah.
categories.
Right.
Many people say, I've never heard of anybody who's had XYZ, you know, and we have, we know, we know these folks, and we can help you understand some of the hard questions that that you must be asking yourself when you get this diagnosis,
No, that's so
including
important.
things like, do I have, will my insurance cover it? You know, what, how will I, you know, how will I continue working? Can I work? Can't I work? What do I do to keep myself safe? And obviously now during this pandemic, it's even more critical that people get the information they need to keep themselves or the person that they care for safe.
Absolutely.
So, you know, that being armed with that information and the right questions and good, you know, reading material that you can look through can make a world of difference um, in something that is so shocking and oftentimes very isolating. I
Right.
think all of us now
We
understand
all
what
know about it.
being isolation is like,
Yeah.
and just magnify that, you know, with a diagnosis of cancer, and you'll get a sense of just how shocking and hard it is. And we have such a broad array of materials to be there for helping patients. And the hope that the research that we're doing is bringing new treatments to patients every day.
And that's where I want to go next in our conversation. And thank you for your thoughts about the patients and the caregivers and the type of support and information that they need. A lot of this is almost a tsunami when it hits you personally. You're never prepared for it. These aren't, like you said, these aren't malignancies that most people know about or know someone that they've experienced that they may have. It's not like the more common ones that we hear about on the news, or that certainly we know that our friend or our neighbor unfortunately has suffered through, and in most cases, thankfully today, has survived, and we certainly celebrate that. We are only able to do that, though, through the advances of you and your colleagues when you're wearing that other hat, that other area of responsibility in which you have done throughout your career, and certainly LLS has done over the years that they have been in existence. But during the current pandemic, I'm really curious to find out what specific barriers have you and your colleagues faced in the clinical research realm, and what are some of the more pressing needs that are currently being worked through with regards to trying to advance some of those trials?
Well, there are some really interesting things happening in the research world. Some of them are really heartbreaking, and that is that laboratories, other than those that are critical for patient care, have been closed around the world, right?
Yeah,
So our research has been impacted
completely
because
stopped.
to
Yeah.
keep, yeah, to keep researchers safe, the right thing, of course, um, labs have had to be closed. So the research we support has definitely had a hiatus.
Yeah. Would
Um,
you say slowed? Would you say paused? Would you say canceled? I mean, what would you say the percentages are there?
I think most of it is paused. The
Okay,
researchers
briefly.
are not giving up on their research. They're writing papers, they're evaluating things. Many researchers, a lot of what they're doing is computational, so they're on their computers doing the research at home. But if your cells are frozen, or your animals are in the, you know, are in the animal area and are not, you know, in experiments, um, getting back into the lab, creating a social distancing, safe laboratory environment, and getting everything started again is going to take additional time and additional dollars. And unfortunately, fundraising, because and I mean we as the nonprofit community, have been impacted because we can't do person-to-person fundraising.
Right. And all events are literally
All
canceled.
of our events, hundreds of events have been
Yeah.
canceled. Um, we're not going to be able to provide that additional support to get those researchers back on their feet. And I'm worried that young researchers will find it so hard to get grants that they'll quit. And
Wow.
I'm not worried for me, but I'm worried for my son and for his children when he has them, that they will not have the kind of science that we are currently enjoying the fruits of right now. And so uh, really, I'm really anxious to help researchers get back into the laboratory and find ways to support them. And LLS is really urgently looking at that. Clinical research too has had to pause. Some trials and in some locations have been able to continue. The FDA really was forward thinking in providing guidance that said, look, you must put the safety of the patient first. So normally you might have to have your laboratories as a clinical trial participant done at the center where the trial is happening.
Right.
The FDA said, you can loosen some of those restrictions and you can let patients get their laboratories closer to home and have medications sent to them, which normally the medications are only distributed at the
At the
central
site. Yeah.
pharmacy,
Right.
at the site of the clinical trial. And rather than having patients travel, hours for a physical exam, you can use telemedicine when it's appropriate. And that has really helped some trials be able to continue even during the pandemic. But other types of trials where precise data and measurements are important, where the side effects are unknown or are known and are severe, for instance, CAR T therapy, where we know that patients can get a severe reaction and require intensive care help. Hospitals obviously said, no, we can't
Can't
have
help
that.
that right now. Yeah.
We can't use an ICU bed for a clinical trial patient when we're booked completely with patients who are experiencing COVID-19 pneumonia and need the ventilators and the ICUs. So many clinical trials have had to pause. And only now are we figuring out ways to start back slowly to get trials back on track. But it will mean a pause in our progress, and it's disappointing, but it's done for patient safety. LLS has a Beat AML master trial, which is a multi-arm trial for patients over the age of 60 with newly diagnosed leukemia. And it uses genomic sequencing and then provides a targeted therapy for each patient. And that trial has had to pause enrollment, but every single patient on that trial has continued to get treated with their experimental drugs during the time of COVID because of the incredibly innovative way we do the trial. Telemedicine and using phones and sending medications was already part of the infrastructure. And so it has continued. And we're very, very pleased that the patients who've been brave enough to be part of this trial are able to continue to get treated.
Well, my hat's off to you and your colleagues, putting in place all of these strategies to overcome all of these challenges, all these barriers. Has certainly benefited the overall cause, and I certainly wish you all success and all the young researchers out there,
Yeah.
like you said, certainly to align their passion and purpose and continue on with their work at the appropriate time with the appropriate precautions and safety measures in place. it's something that we all will certainly benefit from. So I think to encourage them to don't get down if they're depressed,
Yeah.
maybe seek help and guidance from someone who could be a mentor to them to continue this on. There's a reason why they were in research to
All of
begin with,
this, yeah.
you know, and we need them, like you
We
said.
need them,
We
and
need them.
so I'm making a solemn pact that we at LLS will do everything we can to raise funds to help people continue their work and stay in the laboratory. It's
Agree.
a hard time for us, but we will do it because
You know, and I think this is a good time to pause because certainly there's a lot of potential viewers out there that have not had the misfortune of their lab closing, may not have had the misfortune of losing a job. And certainly we encourage you that, if you want to dedicate funds to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, to this basic science research that's being done, to the clinical research that is continuing, to the support and the information that may be needing to be developed for that next malignancy, please donate. If you are someone who can extend themselves and extend some of those financial resources that you and your family have benefited from. Let's think about our neighbors and friends and the researchers and physicians that are on the front lines battling these hematologic malignancies that are tough to begin with, even tougher with the current barriers that we have in place due to pandemic. So I encourage you all, look within your heart, certainly look within your wallets and pocketbook, and whatever you can, support this great organization for all the good that they are certainly doing. So we encourage you to do so. Dr. Nichols, you actually mentioned something that I'm encouraged by and I'm inspired by, and I'm, as you know, someone who has been entrenched in pharmaceutical innovation my entire career. Today, targeted therapies are certainly the norm. We are certainly grateful for that, but many people may not be aware, maybe they are aware of the pharmaceutical product Gleevec, which was the first targeted cancer therapy, a true innovation, a revolution of research, if you will. What was the Leukemia Lymphoma Society role in developing this product?
Well, I'm happy to say that Dr. Brian Drucker, who is an amazing researcher, amazing clinician, and a friend, um, was had a great idea and really understood the drivers of CML and the genetics of this disease. And he was trying to get funding support for an idea of targeted therapy, which was the preclinical version of Gleevec. And because he didn't have a big history of a lot of targeted therapies before that, it was very hard for him to get funding from the National Cancer Institute or some of the big funding sources because they're using taxpayer dollars and they're a little more prescriptive about what they give dollars to. And I think that's
Meet these
totally
criteria, we give you the
yeah,
money. Yeah.
right. LLS has the ability to see a really great and brilliant idea and say, you know what, this this is a great idea. Let's try and help it to the next level to see if it can make it. And so we provided support for Brian many years ago when others wouldn't, and have provided support for him throughout the years because he's done many other things beyond the discovery of this wonderful treatment that has changed CML from a disease that had a 5-year survival to a you can live your normal lifespan for the majority of patients.
Which is
Just groundbreaking. And it also ushered in a new era of understanding that if we look at the biology of what's driving the cancers, we may be able to be less one size fits all about our therapies. And I think that now extends to immunotherapies, which is the new hot area of research, because everyone's immune system is different. And you need precision in immunotherapy and targeting in immunotherapy in the same way you do with agents like Gleevec. Many people have poo-pooed that targeted therapy is only one or two drugs because, not every disease has one driver like CML does. Absolutely true.
Right.
Tyrosine kinases are not, inhibitors are not the answer for every cancer. But understanding the underlying biology is the answer for every cancer.
Right.
And unfortunately, cancers are different. So we need to understand the differences. And that's what is the future of precision medicine. And it includes precision immunotherapy, precision therapy involving the stroma or the supporting structure of the lymph nodes or bone marrow. So many areas where even the gut, understanding the biome, and everyone is different, will make a difference in terms of how we treat patients more effectively and more personally.
No, and I think this is a teachable moment. I like to just take pause for a moment because we've heard in the media, policymakers, people say the battle against cancer. Certainly, it is a battle, but we don't have one cancer and one potential miracle product that's going to work for all cancers. So you're exactly right, Dr. Nichols. I think when I hear that, and I hear things like our moonshot, and we have to realize and take pause. And for all of the viewers out there, they have to realize that just because someone has had success in, say, CML, for example, and Gleevec or another targeted therapy has worked in that area, that doesn't mean it's going to work in another leukemia. It doesn't mean it's going to work in another type of cancer. And we really need to understand the value in a specific treatment will work on a specific cancer. Now, with a little bit of luck, maybe the research can be done if the funding is there, and it makes sense if it is proven in the basic science, where a product may be able to be used in a potential other cancer. And that's where we see the expansion and the indication, and certainly in the translational work that you've done historically, that is what the goal is. We're trying to see if this can work in other areas. But I just want to clarify for anybody that's watching that there is not a single treatment that is going to be able to work in all cancers, even within the narrow scope that is leukemia and lymphoma, like you mentioned. We're talking about hundreds of different types of hematologic malignancies, and unfortunately, we need a product that will work against each of those. Some work for some of those, but certainly there's not a magic bullet that's going to work to eradicate us from all of these. So I think this is important that people have a basic understanding about.
And I think that understanding that precision may require multiple different therapies,
Very
and
much so.
that the therapies in the future may be disease agnostic. And I think this is really important for people to understand, because some people say, well, I don't know if I should support LLS. It sounds like a good organization, but blood cancer isn't that big, and I don't know anyone. Well, our science, Gleevec is a perfect example. One other disease that Gleevec works for is a gastrointestinal stromal tumor. Has nothing to
Nothing to
do
do with it.
with blood cancer.
Yep.
It has to do with what drives the tumor. And we have a researcher in our lymphoma research program who has developed a drug that she's testing in lymphoma. But guess what? It has activity in breast cancer, and it's been approved already in breast cancer. So, the idea in the future will be understand the biology of the tumor and use the drug regardless of what it looks like under the microscope or where it shows up in the body. And I think that's the future we're envisioning, is really understanding the biology or the biomarkers of a tumor, so that we can put together a recipe that will work for an individual patient. And that's the future vision of precision medicine. Not just a one drug and cancer's gone.
No, no. But we know that the key to this, and I'll reiterate it for those that are watching, is funding. And without funding, this is not possible. There is not some magic bucket of money that gets handed over to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society by some shadow government that is looking for this to be funded.
But we're
We,
willing. Yeah.
we need people. We need people that, like our listeners, to think about this and to support Leukemia Lymphoma Society and the other great societies and foundations that are supporting this type of research. And it is only through some of this basic research where we're able to make those type of connections that you just talked about. But when it really comes to the advancements of treating blood cancers, the Leukemia Lymphoma Society has played just a beautiful role in the development of many new drugs, many new medications, both evolutionary and revolutionary, like we talked about, at some point through the development process and the approval process. Any recent highlights that you'd like to share?
Well, I think the one that's been in the news the most recently, I mentioned earlier, is CAR T therapy.
Very much so.
So the I'd like your readers, your listeners and readers to understand that this process to develop something like CAR T therapy, it takes, you know,
A
a
career.
decade or more. It
Yeah.
takes a career, right? Dr. Carl June at University of Pennsylvania was one of the pioneers in this area. And in the early 2000s, he was starting the seminal research for what just in 2017, so you heard me, early 2000s, 2017 got approved as CAR T therapy. In the early 2000s, once again, he was unable to get nationally funded research dollars because it was an out there idea. People said the immune system, cancer, no. And so he applied for an LLS grant, which he got because it seemed like a very exciting potential idea. And we have provided support for CAR T therapy since that time to the tune of something like $40 million over the course of those 15 years. And we were thrilled when this became an effective agent because the initial therapy was used in both lymphoma and leukemia. So it came back to help our patient population in spades. But even if it had been developed and it ended up being used for a different cancer, we would still be thrilled because it's opened up a whole new avenue of cellular therapies and how to alter the immune system to help you fight cancer. And so I think that we feel rightfully proud, and to his credit, he has also thanked multiple times the Carl June, the LLS, for the support we gave him at a critical time when he was going to give up. And so this is, right now, that's the thing I think we're really excited about. And we want to see it get easier, help other kinds of cancers be less expensive, be more off the shelf, be less toxic. And so our research dollars are going to help new efforts to move the needle in the cellular immunotherapy space. So
Any ones in particular that we should be watching for?
Well, there are a number of new areas of using different cells besides T cells for cellular therapy, and for finding ways to utilize products that either can be created at the bedside, so you don't have to send it out and bring it back, or that can be off the shelf. In other words, can be kept in the freezer at the institution and made ready for the patient right there without the cost and the
The
inherent
whole
danger
supply chain. Yeah.
of the supply chain.
Wow.
So we're excited. It's not there yet, but it's coming. And so I think this is generation one, and generation two, three, and four are just going to be help more people and be able to be used more safely.
And that is the absolute, I couldn't even predict you would have said that, but this is the absolute perfect segue to my next quote from you. And you've said that each new treatment is a significant advance. How important are those evolutionary discoveries when you line them up against the truly revolutionary developments and approvals? I mean, and you could even take us back to how some of that basic science allows us to leapfrog and take such a major step forward in terms of treatment. But you said this, that each new treatment approval is a significant advance. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, the reason that it is a significant advance is that the the initial approval may be for a small area. It
Right.
may just be for one disease or one, it's usually very specific. But scientists then have the opportunity to use the science, use the new agent, and explore how it can be combined, how it can be used in other diseases. And so it offers not only scientists, but doctors more options to provide to the patients. And I think that, sometimes we look at it and say, well, that's just incremental.
Mm-hmm.
It might be for what it's approved
For
for,
now, yeah.
and it might be for right this moment, but in the future, each therapy can lead all kinds of new places, and that's the hope of keeping our scientists busy and thinking. And so I want to be sure you know that they're still out there thinking, even if they aren't actively in the lab with their cells and their pipettes.
Yeah, we are grateful for their endless curiosity and certainly their dedication to their craft. Without those individuals along the way, we would never have arrived where we are today. Being thankful for all of these developments, and I'm curious about your current grant process. Without sharing too much of that special sauce behind the scenes about the rigors that go into the decision making, I am extremely interested, and I think those listening, we may be able to spark some curiosity or some interest in determining, the size, the scope, the numbers of grants that you have at current, and some of the more notable or innovative projects that are open for consideration right now with LLS.
So we have over 200 active grants, uh,
Amazing. That's just amazing.
uh, and they span from 1 year, little bit of money for a out there idea grant to $5 million over 5 years, multi-institutional, multi-laboratory collaborative projects.
Wow.
And there are investigators awards for new investigators, for mid-career, for fellows and senior investigators, for career development as well, that are not specifically as project oriented. And there are translational grants trying to get some of the science to be tested in the clinic. So it really spans a huge continuum of different grants. And each program, there are some that are specific for myeloid leukemia, for lymphoid leukemia, for myeloma, for childhood blood cancers. So there are also specific tracks. And we do that because then we bring a group of 15 to 20 world-class researchers to review the grants. So it's a really rigorous process with people. It's not just a bunch of us at LLS. We've got some great scientists at LLS, but it's not just us deciding yes or no. we bring in experts and we rigorously review and discuss and go over the details so that we can rank list what we think is going to be the most impactful. And the fact that we can trace over the last 3 years something like 45 of the 51 new drug approvals we touched at some point in their development, and oftentimes multiple points, just tells you that the way we review and choose what to fund is rigorous and it's smart.
No, and it's putting the right amount of support at the right time behind the right projects, especially if you're getting the type of outcome that you're seeing in terms of these treatments becoming available. So we've talked a lot about patients and caregivers and good information and what people certainly are facing as they are receiving a diagnosis. We've certainly have navigated the realm of clinical development from basic science research, encouraging some of those young investigators, and also talking about some of the major milestones and major accomplishments of the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. There's another unbelievable part of what all of you and your colleagues do, and that's the advocacy work, working with the policymakers to develop and push legislation that will ensure that patients get the quality of care that they need as well as that they deserve. What are some of the landmark policies that have been completed in support of patients with some of these blood cancers?
Well, let me tell you what we're fighting for right now,
Please.
because I think that there have been some important legislation for funding research and for continuing research, but in terms of the patients, there is now threat to access to medical care, and
Very much so.
we at LLS do not care what you call the program that provides patients the ability to get high quality insurance coverage.
Whatever it is,
we're
let's just make
not
sure they
partisan,
get it. Yeah.
but we care that they get it.
Yeah.
There are cancer patients living right now who don't know they have the diagnosis, who are unfortunately losing their jobs and losing their health insurance because of the COVID-19 crisis. And we are going to have an even larger swath of patients who are uninsured, who don't get their cancer diagnosed on time because they can't afford to get checked. And when they get
Or they've been delayed because of the current news.
exactly,
Yeah.
they've been told not to come in for their scan or their
Yeah.
blood work because it's too dangerous.
Yeah.
And these folks are the numbers are extraordinary, and what that means for the progress that we've made in cancer, it's heartbreaking to me to think about what will happen 5 years from now, that we'll be taking a step back instead of a step forward. We need people to have insurance that will cover cancer care.
Full
Every
stop,
child,
period, agree. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
every child that gets diagnosed now will have a pre-existing condition for the rest of their life. We must ensure that pre-existing conditions do not keep you from getting quality insurance.
No, not ever again.
It cannot, and so we are there every day talking to legislators, helping craft the information that they need. And our volunteers and patients have been so wonderful in advocating with us. We did a virtual day of action.
I was just going to
May
ask you about that. That was May
20th.
20th. So tell us about that initiative.
So we asked our patient advocates to, and everyone can be a patient advocate. You don't have to be a patient. We texted people, we emailed them, you sign up on your phone, and we populate letters that you can personalize, and by your zip code, we can tell you who your representatives are who should be notified. And you can write to them and say, I'm a cancer patient, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a scientist. And I think, surprise medical bills and affordable care and pre-existing conditions, you can fight for those. And I have to tell you that lawmakers right now are inundated
Very much.
with information. But having patients tell their stories, having scientists tell their stories, having doctors tell their stories, nurses tell their stories, it's impactful. And when we go as a big group and bombard, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge
We were
difference.
able to get their attention.
Yes. And so I would urge people, who want to stop complaining and do something, to go on our website and join our advocacy. It costs nothing, and you get a couple of texts when it's an important piece of legislation coming up, and it takes 2 minutes to fill out the information and ping your legislators to say, I care about this. And they listen to that because you vote.
Dr. Nichols, I know we're short on time, but can you briefly talk about your journey, your personal journey, and some of the highlights of your career since joining the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society?
Well, my personal journey, I, um, I have to thank a, a number of teachers that I had. And the very first one, I don't remember his name because I was a stupid 14-year-old who didn't understand how important and impactful teachers can be. But I had a wonderful biology teacher in high school. Prior to that, I had no interest in science at all, and I wasn't in a family of physicians. He made biology come alive for me. And from then on, I knew I wanted to be a scientist. And I had a great mentor in college, Dr. Paul Solomon, who allowed me to do research in his laboratory. I had gotten 100 on a test, and he pulled me in and said, have you thought about doing research? And I said,
Have I got a career for
yeah.
you?
And
Yeah.
so I started working for him. And he also gave me the great advice that if I wanted to do human-based research, I should get an MD. I hadn't thought about going to medical school at all. I was on a track to get a PhD and a science degree. And he said, no, having an MD will allow you to be a more impactful scientist if you want to do clinical research. And then at University of Chicago, I had a wonderful mentor, Harvey Gollum, who I recently was in contact with.
Oh, fantastic.
He was my first attending on the leukemia service at University of Chicago, my very first month of internship. And I had 3 patients with hairy cell leukemia on his clinical trial.
Wow.
And they all had Legionnaire's disease and all kinds. It was the most complicated. And I worked like a crazy woman, but I was fascinated by the clinical trial process. And at the end of the month, we had our sign out about how did you do this month? And he had me in his office. He gave me a Coca-Cola and said, oncology, sort of like plastics. And the graduate, he said, oncology, you're cut out for it. And so I have to thank him because all 3 of those mentors
Planting those seeds, yeah.
huge differences in what I decided to do. And then since I've been at LLS, the most impactful thing that I've been able to do is to talk to patients and to the patient community at large, to sort of increase hope about that science will save us. And I think in this time of COVID, I'm hoping that people believe that, because I believe that. And that, supporting patients and supporting scientists is how we keep our future bright.
Agree, and I could not have said that better. On a deeply personal note, many of us have lost colleagues, family, friends, and some of us have seen the passing of some public figures that we admire. Have you lost anyone recently during this unprecedented time? And Who were they? What was their influence on your life, your career? Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with them?
Oh, well, I'm so happy to say I have not lost anyone close to me.
That's fantastic news.
And I feel incredibly fortunate because I live in New York City. And I
Despite
work.
the image behind Dr. Nichols, where we
Yes.
all want to be right now.
Well, I do have a weekend house
Yes.
out there. Yes. But I live in New York City, and the national office of the Leukemia Lymphoma Society is in Westchester County, which was also a very heavily hit
Was the epicenter, yeah.
area. It was the epicenter. And yet, um, you know, I have been fortunate that no one close uh, was impacted. However, I have lots of medical colleagues who are impacted every day, have gotten sick, and who also are attending to people who are sick and are putting themselves at risk. And those are the people, and I know we're hearing it and everybody's a hero, but the truth is, you have no idea how devastating this is for physicians, nurses, to see this every day and get up and go back in the next day. And I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who are exhausted, but they know this is what they have to do. And having been a young physician during the AIDS crisis, I know how a little bit about how that feels, that seeing young people die and people being incredibly sick and not understanding all of what you need to understand. Um, the bravery there is extraordinary, and that's really who my heart goes out to right now.
I don't think we could ever say thank you enough to those people. I don't think that there's ever going to be a time in the future where we will certainly not appreciate the efforts of all of these physicians that have taken on so much at a rate and at a volume that's never been seen before. I've talked to a lot of colleagues. I've interviewed several individuals that have been on the front lines, especially those that are literally on the front lines in the emergency department, and just the volume of people that they're seeing, not only with COVID or COVID-like related symptoms, but also some of the mental health effects. We know we're in Mental Health Awareness Month in the month of May. I've had a lot of conversations about that. We've had 2 episodes so far talking about that. And, I start thinking back, living in New York, as you have, and as I have, post 9/11, I'm always seeing someone from the military or a first responder and thanking them for their service. I think after this, we owe that to our healthcare practitioners on the front lines, those nurses, those pharmacists, paramedics, EMT, and certainly all the wonderful physicians. But as I've also shared with some colleagues recently, the people who are continuing to lead us in terms of those roles that we don't think about, the people who come in and ensure the cleanliness within the
Oh
institutions,
gosh, yes.
those people that are working within the infrastructure of the hospitals and the clinics, the people who are managing the supply chain and procurement. And I think about a good friend of mine who works for one of those larger supply houses, who literally is getting up, at the wee hours in the morning to drive a truck to make sure that those supplies are continuously restocked. The amount of supplies that the average hospital has gone through cannot even be estimated right now, just the churn of materials and PPE and masks. So I think we need to really be thankful, certainly grateful, and in awe of the unbelievable work that all these folks are doing. I'm happy to hear that no one personally has been affected, but when we say that, I think all of us, we're all at this point really in awe and grateful for the great work that all these folks are continuing to do. Dr. Nichols, let me open up the floor to you for the final word in our conversation.
Well, I'd like to come back to one thing we talked about earlier because I want your listeners to know about something that I'm very excited about for the future at LLS, and that is that we are undertaking a master trial and for childhood leukemia. And I told you before about targeted therapies and the need for us to get more personalized. Well, children whose leukemia comes back after their initial therapy have a high chance of not making it. And that's unacceptable. And so we are going to bring what we've learned from our adult clinical trial to our children's initiative, and hope to start in calendar 21 our own, what we call PEDAL, master trial for pediatric acute leukemia. And this will not just be in the United States, but internationally. And so we are going to be announcing this shortly, so your listeners get a sneak peek at what we will be announcing. But I'm very excited that we can change drug development for children who haven't had the same degree of new drugs and new therapies as the adult cancer world has. So that's my final teaser for the end, Mario, and thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Nichols. I am in awe of everything that you do, and certainly am so thankful for having met you earlier in both of our careers. The work that you did back at Roche, the work that you're doing now. At some day, we certainly will be able to tell the amazing story, the legacy of what you and so many of your colleagues that have worked with you continue to create. And we are certainly grateful for your ability to recognize what that potential is in that young investigator, in that grant, and to see it through. It is your vision. It is you taking that idea and being able to nurture that that has allowed us to continue with the advances that we have. So thank you for your visionary work. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for all the charity and work that you're doing to train and to physically be involved in accomplishing so many of these challenges. You could read about Dr. Nichols and all of her training. She posts on LinkedIn. I follow her, and the training that she is continuing, scaling mountains of all
kinds, physical and mental.
And certainly data funding. So my last plea to everyone that's listening, certainly if you and your loved ones have benefited at this time with good health and certainly have wealth as well, let's share a little bit about what we have with those that need it the most. Certainly it's an impressive group who continues to do nothing but good in all the areas that are needed the most. So for New Right Network, I'm Mario Nacinovich. I am eternally grateful to you, Dr. Nichols, and all your colleagues to access this episode and others on demand in terms of all of our programming from Celton Health. Please visit newrightnetwork.com, the right voice right now. Thank you for tuning in. I wish you the very best to stay informed and to stay healthy. Welcome to the Healthcare Voice of the New Right Network. This is Health on Health with Mario Nacinovich.